Hey everyone, and welcome. Thanks so much for joining us for today's Meet the Analyst webinar, The Impact of Generative AI in Marketing, a panel discussion. I'm your host, Jeremy Goldman, Senior Director of Marketing, Commerce, and Tech Briefings at Insider Intelligence, and I am joined by a special panel today. So I'd like to welcome Neha Shah, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Salesforce, Fatemeh Khatibloo, Director of Responsible AI and Tech at Salesforce also, and my colleague, Kelsey Voss, Principal Analyst at Insider Intelligence. So first off, it's really wonderful to have you all here.
Thank you, Jeremy. It's great to be here today.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Jeremy. Really nice to meet everyone here today.
Yeah, really excited for our conversation. Thanks so much.
I think we could have a debate over who's more excited, because I'm really psyched for this one. And yeah, before we get into our discussion, I'd really like to thank Salesforce for making today's webinar possible. But a few things before we dive in. I have a bunch of questions on my own plan, but this is also an opportunity for you at home or the office to ask your burning questions, and we're here to tackle them. So just use the chat window on the right of the video feed to submit them at any time, and we will get to as many as we can. There's no need to take notes. If you'd rather not, we will be emailing you a link to view the full recording of today's discussion. Now, let's get started. So first off, I wanted to ask all of you, I saw an interesting data point from Salesforce, actually, that over half of marketers currently use Gen AI, generative AI, and another 22% plan to use it soon. That's from a June Salesforce survey. So who knows, the number has probably creeped up even a little bit since then. I'm just wondering, are marketers concerns about Gen AI shifting? Because it seems like at the start, there were quite a number of concerns. Are they thinking about it a little bit differently? Kelsey, maybe you want to start?
That's a great question to start the conversation with, Jeremy. But remember, some marketers have been using Gen AI for quite some time. Think Grammarly and Jasper, and AI and machine learning are baked into many of the systems that marketers already use. But it's thanks to OpenAI's ChatGPT and DALL-E 2 and its counterpoint Midjourney, which opened the doors for Gen AI to everyone. And that's why we have this explosion in interest. So it is changing. There is a shift in concerns. We're definitely beyond the concern of should we incorporate Gen AI tools and tactics in marketing. The concern is how to implement and use Gen AI successfully and strategically. Most marketers are still learning and exploring the latest developments in this technology. So there's this recognition of how complex the tech can be and how quickly the landscape is evolving and maturing. And there's ongoing concerns, of course, in the regards to the handling of large amounts of data, sensitive customer data in particular, proprietary company information, privacy laws and regulations, transparency with the use of AI, bias, lack of authenticity, misinformation. I'll stop there. Neha, would you like to add to that?
Yes, and I think those are amazing point, Kelsey, right? I totally agree when you say like there is ChatGPT, OpenAI, DALL-E that has just democratized how many people can use it. This reminds me of a conversation that I was having with one of our customers at Dreamforce, and which was not a while ago, like it was like a month ago. And what they mentioned is this is the first time they can see that AI is more useful than difficult to use, right? And I think the reason we are seeing this level of adoption, all the numbers that you share, Jeremy, right, where half of the marketers are already using generative AI, other 22% they are planning to use, that's because of ease of use, right? It really democratizes who can use this technology. And that's why marketers are more and more increasingly trying out generative AI features. So to Kelsey's point, it's not the ease of use, it's like understanding, can we actually trust AI, right? So with any new technology, it's paired with, that's the dual nature of any new technology, it's paired with certain risk. Like a lot of people are concerned about all the things that Kelsey mentioned, but also trust, data privacy. Is the information that I'm sending to these models, are these going to be shared externally, or does it stay proprietary to my company? So I think that's what we are seeing. But the reason we are seeing high level of adoption is in the same survey that you mentioned, Jeremy, that happened in June. Marketers estimate that generative AI could save them 5 hours a week. Now, if you add that up, that's over a month a year, right? So we are going to see marketers leaning in and using this technology, but I think concerns are still there, but it's not concerns around, do I implement? How do I use it? It's more about, what does this mean for my data? What does it mean for privacy? How do I trust these models and data?
Right. And how can it best be used? Right.
And I think one of the things that we've really seen, which is interesting, is to your point, both Kelsey and Neha, that democratization of these platforms has meant that kind of guidance inside of the organization has fallen behind sort of where and what we can do. So I think some of those numbers, the 59% of folks, of marketers using generative AI tools, I suspect there would be some CISOs out there, chief security officers, and chief privacy officers, who at some point said, look, like, you can't go putting company data straight into these platforms. This is company IP, this is company information. And so I think now what we're looking at is, how do we make sure that these systems are democratized, but tuned to what a marketer needs and what a marketer is trying to accomplish.
So then, I guess, to follow up with that, Fatemeh, okay, so I feel like trust remains an issue almost with a C-suite about, let's not have data leak out of our organization. But then obviously you have trust remaining a bit of an issue from a consumer standpoint, right? With all of these really interesting use cases like content creation, data analysis, inspiring creative thinking. So what would help support continued adoption and foster that kind of trust that marketers need in Gen AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that we have discovered, so I sit in Salesforce's Office of Ethical and Humane Use of Technology, and we have a real focus on building responsible AI. And when we started to really support our product partners and our teams on this, it became very quickly evident that we actually needed to come up with some principles and some guidelines around responsible AI. And all of this kind of ladders up to trust, right? I think historically, for the last couple of years, we've really thought about trust as a foundation of sort of privacy and security. And now what we're seeing is actually we need to expand that. And so we've got these 5 pillars of trusted and responsible AI, which are accuracy, safety, honesty, empowerment. We want to supercharge human beings. We don't want to replace them. And sustainability, or I'm sorry, safety, which really goes to the ideas of toxicity and bias. So these are the kind of principles that we're working with. And we know that in the industry, lots of companies are talking about responsible AI and how do we build, guidance around this. And we think these five pillars are really what we need to be building into products, so that when they go into the hands of the people that use them, those people are empowered with trust already.
And Neha, actually, just to follow up from what Fatemeh was saying, I think that trust is so important because we see all of this promise of some of the things that Gen AI can do. Obviously, people have been talking about personalization for a long time and how to really essentially ramp up their efforts in that regard and deliver true personalization. So how can generative AI help marketers overcome the barriers of delivering personalization at scale?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, right? Like, that's one of the main use cases. So I sit in the marketing cloud product marketing org at Salesforce. So I talk to marketers who are our customers all the time. And to add to a point that Fatemeh was talking about trust, one of the things that I hear from marketers is they want to make sure that their customer data is not the company's business, right? Like, they want to make sure they are protected. because that's important because they want to leverage this data to deliver personalization at scale. So at Salesforce, we are constantly talking to customers. And in one of our recent survey, what we learned is, not a surprise to anyone, that 65% of customers say that they will stay loyal to a company if they offered a more tailored experience, right? Like that's the importance of personalization. You hear it from marketers, but you also hear it from customers. Like one bad experience will help that, like will make them change their loyalty to a different company or a product or service. And you would see that, and this is not just true for B2B, but you see that in your B2C, like in your daily life as well. And actually that sets a standard, right? The experience that you have in your personal life, that sets the standard in terms of how you expect even your B2B experience is to be. So what generative AI really helps, and when we think of personalization at scale, the holy grail there is the last mile personalization. It is easier to personalize at a very broad strokes, right? Like at early part, like, oh, whether you're a prospect or a customer, and I'm going to personalize at that level. And that's something that we are able to scale right now. But what is tricky and what is hard is everyone talks about one-to-one personalization, but there is no such thing as one-to-one personalization. It happens at different segments. But with generative AI, that can help really scale that personalization at scale, at one level, at micro segments level. Some of the things that generative AI helps with is, and I've seen a lot of customers start using it, it's around content creation. When you think of personalization, it's the content that you receive, right? So generative AI can really help you create different subject lines that's going to resonate. That's the key thing. When you receive that email, that decides whether you're going to open and click on that email or not. So it helps you remove the guesswork, right? You can test it out. You can create a different subject line, but it also helps with like inspire creative writing. So it's like, it gives you a starting point. Like a lot of people have writer's block, and it gives you a starting point that a marketer can update, evaluate, enhance based on the customer that they are working with or they're targeting. So I think that really helps like bring efficiency and scale, and it helps really remove the barriers around.
And Neha, I would add to that, going back to the actual personalization part, before even getting to the content pieces, the data itself and analyzing that data, having clean data, having accurate data. And you can use Gen AI algorithms to analyze vast data sets to pinpoint specific needs and preferences of buyers and customers. And this analysis can help marketers gain those real-time insights, which can be the starting point or the foundation for personalized marketing campaigns. Before you even get started with the campaigns, it all starts with the data.
Yep, totally agree.
Really great point. And Kelsey, maybe a follow-up. This is actually a good one for you. It's no secret that budgets are tight this year. I actually know that you covered some of this in your recent MarTech forecast report, that Gen AI may not see the massive investments going forward that some might expect. People are still investing in the right tools, but trying to do more with less. So given that marketers are being tasked in that way, how can Gen AI help unlock productivity, kind of like that 5 hours that we were talking about before, right, which sounds fantastic.
Yes, and yes, you are right. Marketers are pausing on major purchases of the technology. However, smaller investments in Gen AI can certainly help unlock that productivity for marketers. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of marketers are already using Gen AI, particularly in the creative process. But with ongoing advancements, I think that Gen AI is becoming an even more valuable tool. It can help with brainstorming and ideation. It can help with simple writing tasks, such as writing product descriptions, ad copy, subject lines, and it can generate millions of variations for A/B and multivariable testing. And this helps marketers focus on strategic and higher quality content, so you get those menial tasks out of the way. It can also automate SEO tasks such as keyword research, on-page optimization, It can help perform content audits. There's so many ways that Gen AI can help with productivity, particularly with those menial like tasks that nobody really, those 5 hours that marketers spend, on the stuff. It opens the door for more creative thinking and more creative processes that marketers can embark on. And I think that's where, Gen AI can really help.
I think that goes back to, Kelsey, to that notion of supercharging humans and augmenting human capabilities as opposed to replacing humans. And we have a product description generator in our Commerce Cloud solution, and it's exactly that. I reviewed it with the team, and it's exactly this idea of, here's all of this data. I've got this data in my product table. How do I very quickly generate on-brand product descriptions? And it's exactly that sort of thing that I think lets marketers go back to the strategic stuff. And I think that's really exciting for marketers. It's an exciting opportunity.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Fatemeh, right? So Jeremy, you're talking about budgets and how that's stopping, budget constraints are stopping marketers from making big purchases. But this is also what we have to remember is this has also become the year of efficiency, right? When I look at 2023, not just at one particular company, but irrespective of the industry, irrespective of the segment, irrespective of what you're trying to do, everyone has been talking about efficiency. So yes, there are budget constraints, but generative AI adds so much efficiency that there is a lot of investments that we see, right? So it's not just the task, like everyone leverages it for content creation, but think a step further. Like when I talk to some of the marketers, they're like, how about once the content is created, it can give that first step in content curation. Like now I want to curate it across different forms. Now I just don't want to use this in my email, but what if I took a step further and started leveraging it for my SMS, my social channels, ask them to create a copy for a different type of content? What if I extend the content creation process to other forms like landing pages and forms, right? So marketers are being strategic and they are investing in the areas that's going to help drive efficiency. So that goes hand in hand. And that's why I think we can really see Gen AI unlocking productivity for marketers.
I think that's a great use case, is that repurposing of content and changing one piece of content into a different format. I think, for different channels, for use in different channels, and then, or, even translating that content into a different language, particularly valuable for global marketers, right? You have a content that works great in the US, but it needs to be translated and, adapted to maybe a British audience or a German audience. So I think that's where Gen AI can really help with that productivity.
Trying to connect to our earlier discussion, Kelsey, around trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that marketers really appreciate is when generative AI content is created, there's a human in the loop. There's a marketer in the loop to ensuring that this adheres to the brand guidelines, right? Like you do not want to send out an email to your customer if it is not on point, it does not have the brand voice. So having that human, and Fatemeh, to your point, it's like giving more powers to the human, the marketer, through this generative AI process. That's important. So I think having the human in the loop is really important, because then what happens is the model learns, and then you can do it at scale, whether you're trying across different languages, whether you're trying across different campaigns, like they can continue to ensure that the brand voice is consistent. And that's a tedious process, right? At that point, it becomes tedious if you have to go and evaluate every piece of content to make sure, is it on brand? Is the tone accurate? So that's something that can also, you can leverage generative AI to drive efficiency on that front.
I think that human oversight is also, it's just a great point. It's essential, right? That human oversight, particularly with complex decisions or if empathy is required. And so I think you're right. It's a balanced approach between, combining AI's capabilities with human judgment. And that can definitely help enhance the trust in AI systems if you have that balance.
And that's really something that we have worked really hard on in our trust layer, right? Our team really works closely with Neha and with product managers and with engineering teams to say, what are the guardrails that we want to build into any given product, any given feature? And human in the loop is always at the top of that mitigation strategies, right? What we don't want to do is create burden, but we do want to create a little bit of what we call mindful friction. And these are tiny little tweaks that you make in UX or tiny little tweaks you make in the prompt templating that really help us to ensure that we are building trust into every single feature and product. And so that trust layer gives us the opportunity to do things like, hey, we want to make sure that the brand voice fits. And by the way, if you can't find the information that is being asked for, return back to us and say, I'm sorry, I can't find the information. Don't make something up. Right? Which is something we know, this idea of hallucinations, we know that these models do it. So how do we build those things directly into the trust layer? And human in the loop is very much one of those things.
So if I could say, I think one of the things that a lot of the CMOs that I interview, they kind of say that there are all these things on their punch list that they want to get to. So it's not even just the productivity, it's the things that like the translations, right? It's the ensuring brand voice, as you mentioned, that are very difficult to, like, in theory, of course, they're part of your job. In reality, it's, you're pulled in 15 different directions. So it's the allowing you to do these things, you're right, that that often get overlooked. And, speaking of things that get overlooked, even beyond marketing, I know, Fatemeh, you touched on briefly customer experience, essentially, and I feel like there are a lot of opportunities when it comes to improving CX and incorporating Gen AI to make that happen.
Yeah, in fact, when I'm a direct marketer by trade and training, and one of the things that I think a lot about is we've had this sort of like, we've always said as marketers, right message, right place, right time. That's our holy grail, right? That's what we've always wanted to do. And I think we have come to the understanding that it's actually a very, very hard thing to do because of channel explosion, because the way that consumers interact has changed, because we don't always know where somebody is, and we don't know exactly what's going on in that individual's relationship with our brand. And so we can't quite deliver on the right time. And I think about things like, I make a phone call because I've got a service problem, or I'm in the middle of a very complicated return, and here I am getting marketing messages. I don't want that right now. I'm very upset with you at the moment. And so I think that when we bring together generative AI in these different areas, rooted to your CRM data, right? It is your service data. It is your, and when I say your, I mean marketer and your brand. It's your CRM data. It's your service data. It's your marketing data. And we're grounding that in your customer data. I think what happens is you can bring those things together and you can really communicate the power of, hey, make sure that we're not marketing to somebody who is in the middle of a complicated return process. Or when we think about next best action, inform it with service data, with commerce data. And that, to me, feels like we're getting closer to being able to deliver on that thing that we've always talked about in a safe way.
Yep. And Fatemeh, you're absolutely right, because one of the things, there are certain blind spots, right, when you talk to marketers, and you mentioned channels. And one of the things that happens is when you think, or when you talk to marketers about channels, they think of all the digital channels. Like the first thing that comes to mind is like my email, my social, like, am I connecting all of that data for my customer? But what is also important, which Fatemeh talked about, it's the same customer that when they're interacting with your sales or when you're interacting with your service. So the example that that Fatemeh mentioned, it's what's worse than getting an email asking you to like buy a product when you have an open service case is someone actually calling and selling you something, right? So you have to think of all these human channels, and generative AI does have that capability to expand beyond marketing and really transform the customer experience, or CX, as an organization across, because then you can get these human channels to align with your digital channels, which are equally important. In fact, you're getting more data, more personal data about a customer from these human channels. So imagine, like, if you are just calling for a service case or something that you want to return, imagine if you can take that call summary through generative AI and pass that information to marketing. You can do that a lot more efficiently than trying to get this data, someone in like your service team trying to manually enter. And that's what we are. Like, we have that capability to do like generative case summary in our Service Cloud. And if we could bring that to other parts of the business, other organization, that is true customer experience, because it's the same person that's talking to your sales team. It's the same person interacting on your website, clicking the emails, and the same people's talking to your service team. So how do you connect all of this? And generative AI can bring a lot of impact and efficiency in that process.
And that's so important for customer satisfaction and loyalty. If you can take a chatbot conversation and figure out like what went wrong with this particular situation, and then turn that around into something positive, I mean, that's quite the benefit that Gen AI can have.
Yeah. And I know we've been talking a lot about personalization and CX, but the other benefit that I'm starting to hear a lot from customers is just data analysis. It's not just one customer. How do you scale it, right? Like, you have hundreds and thousands of customers. You have a lot of this data. Somebody needs to analyze and these large data sets and provide insights based on how does it benefit for marketing, or what should service do? And generative AI has that capability, right? So going back to our data part, like, that's a lot of times overlooked. And how do we take advantage of generative AI to bring that level of data analysis and decision making?
So it sounds like you're kind of almost preempting my next question, which is use cases. You know, like, obviously feel free to share names if you're able to, probably can't, but I feel like all three of you have something in common, is that, you know, you're either speaking to clients, you know, Kelsey, or customers, you know, to the rest of you, to see all these different interesting things that that you can do. And I think it's obviously exciting because it's so early on and nascent that people are trying a lot of different things. So maybe even building on what you've shared so far, are there any other interesting use cases that you've come across?
Yeah, I mean, back to what I've reported on recently, I've talked to a few companies that are using generative AI at various stages in the customer lifecycle. And Tapestry is one. They're the parent company of Coach and Kate Spade and Stuart Weitzman. And they use a company called Persado and their dynamic motivation. And this solution helps transform static online cart experiences into personalized paths to purchase. And so Tapestry uses it to generate words and phrases based on their buyers' browsing behavior and preferences and other factors in real time, while that customer is in the checkout experience. And so these Gen AI driven personalized paths, they can reduce cart abandonment and deliver, from what they have discovered, 3 to 5% increase in e-commerce revenues. So that, again, back to that personalization and being, you know, with real-time insights and transforming that into actual, you know, real-time recommendations and maybe messaging for that person so they don't abandon the cart. That's just, I think, a great example of how you can put Gen AI to work.
Yeah, I think one of the areas that I'm really passionate about is we want to serve our customers. We want to make sure that consumers are sort of centered in this work and in the features that we're building. And there's another stakeholder, and it's the worker, right? And so we want to empower workers. We want to empower, I support our Service Cloud product as well. And we have a field service, the people who come to your house to install your cable or repair an appliance. Those folks are on the road a lot. And one of the features that we've built for them is a way to give them a summary of every appointment, that they don't have to go in and look at every bit of the case notes and every bit of like what's going on here. They get a pre-work summary as they're going to a place. Now, what does that do? That means that when they get to that customer's location, they are empowered with all of the important data that they need, the key information. And when they walk into that customer's house or office or job site, they know what's going on, and they're like really up to speed, and they've got all of the right equipment, and they've got all of the right parts, and they can walk in and be immediately effective and deliver a really great customer experience. We're talking about marketing. That's a frontline worker that is a brand ambassador. And so how do we, I think we're thinking about how do we bring these things together, and to Neha's point, what do we now know about that on-site appointment that can inform what we want to market to that individual next time we're communicating with them.
Yep. And I know we talked a lot about like content creation. How does content go beyond email? Like marketers are really interested in those use cases, or multi-channel marketing, or even thinking about curating different content. But one of the things that I'm also hearing marketers a lot interested in, like, think about segment creation. All of your campaign, they start with creating segment. Like, who do you want to target? Like, who are the key members of this campaign? And that is based on the data. And as a company, you have lots of data. And a lot of times that's like you're reaching out to someone in IT or a technical marketer who's writing all these SQL queries and pulling that data. Generative AI could change that, right? You could say, I want in this campaign, I want folks who have a certain title, belong to a certain geography, belong to a certain type of company, and that democratizes and makes all the marketers powerful. So I think that's a really good use case as well, where you're saying that just shifts, like you get this data real time versus putting in a request and that query goes out to someone in IT who pulls like data, because then it's not real time. And also the information is contained for like certain number of people in the organization versus like really helping everyone do their pull the segment for the market that they are targeting. So I think we're also hearing a lot of excitement from marketers around how can I create segment based on data here, and how can I use generative AI and just natural language prompts to do that.
Yeah, and I think building on what both of you just said, I'm reminded of another case study from Acrolinx and them helping a British semiconductor company with their technical manuals, which were 6,000 pages long and in different languages. And they have 70 plus technical writers that have to did manually, kind of write all these manuals out, and they had no consistency on how the coding was written or the language. And so with Gen AI and, and also, AI and natural language processing, really, they were able to make that so much better, and they could publish these technical manuals in multiple languages that were easy to read, consistent in style and tone, on brand, in a much faster way than 70 technical writers could do. And then the customer on their end got these manuals that they found then very helpful and kind of inspired that customer satisfaction as well.
So I think I've got time for one more question for me, and then we've got some really good audience questions coming in. So in a nutshell, maybe we could get a quick answer from each of you about this. We have a forecast for generative AI users and what we expect in ChatGPT specifically, and then the data is obviously changing very quickly. The situation on the ground is rapidly evolving. But how about for you all? Do you think that AI adoption is going to flatten or decrease given the quick adoption of the last year? And then are there any other risks or concerns that we haven't talked about that might slow it down?
I can start. I think the AI adoption is likely to continue to grow, right? And evolve versus like flatten because the benefits are substantial. As Fatemeh mentioned, we are not seeing everyone adopt because they're getting these top-down guidance in terms of like, do not use this because of all the concerns that we have. Like we have the concerns that we hear around data privacy and security, ethical concerns, any biases, regulatory compliance. So there are risks and challenges. And as we address these, I think the adoption will increase because right now it's like a double-edged sword. You have efficiency, you have productivity coming from generative AI. Folks want to use it, but there's also this gray area where I don't have answers around all of these areas. And I'm not sure if I can, people are using it for their personal content and personal life, but like, how do I use it for my business work, right? And there are guardrails that are in place. But as we address some of these risks and as organizations and marketers become more and more familiar into how do we navigate ensuring all these guardrails, like there will be increase in adoption.
Yeah, I think my suspicion is that we will hit a plateau at some point in the next 18 to 24 months, and then we'll pick back up again. And I mean that from a kind of global usage perspective, not a marketing specific perspective. I think that plateau will largely be driven by regulators and legislators who don't fully understand technology coming in and doing some like finger wagging, and we need to do some. Now that's not to say that we don't need some protections and that we don't need some guidance and guardrails, and we've talked about that pretty publicly, and we are signatories to the White House coalition on generative AI. So we are, we're really passionate about those protections, and I think ultimately we'll probably end up in a little bit of like a regulatory rat race, trying to figure out in 18 months, like what actually is permissible in what geographies. So I think that'll be sort of the cause for a little bit of a plateau, but it's impossible to imagine a world now without generative AI. Listen, I planned an entire 2-week European vacation with ChatGPT, and I said, here's my base, here's where I'm ending, here's where I'm flying into, give me a 12-day agenda, right? And then I was able to tweak it and fine tune it, and so it's yeah, I think the genie has left the bottle, and I think that generative AI is really, really fundamentally going to change the way that we interact with the web and the world.
I agree with that plateau. I think there is a wait and see attitude of it with marketers. Just let's see how this technology evolves. Let's kind of iron out these concerns that we have about privacy issues and the concerns about bias. And then I do see investments picking up in the next year or two. And I think, it also has to do with the marketers themselves and feeling secure with using it and having the training and understanding how, they're not necessarily, writers right now on strike or were on strike, afraid to lose their jobs, and, SAG and AFTRA is still fighting it out. But, there's that real fear, but, there's also marketers, I think, that are gung-ho on knowing that this is going to enhance and help them and maybe better their roles. But I do think there are challenges internally with making sure you have the right data, that data quality, balancing human and AI, like just making that balance is as good as you can be to make sure you have the best outcome. Having that internal alignment, that team alignment with your C-suite, with sales, with product, with IT, with your data scientists and analysts, being all on the same page as to what your expectations are, what your goals are, how this will be implemented, and then being able to monitor that and make sure that you're getting the best return on investment for whatever tools you do invest in. So I think there's a lot to contend with, but I agree. The genie's out of the bottle. I think Gen AI is going to be a central part of how marketers even plan their 2024 strategies.
I couldn't agree with you more, Kelsey. I think too, one thing I would say in that kind of alignment and testing and sort of figuring things out is just because we have this generative AI hammer does not mean that everything is a nail. And so I see a lot of marketers kind of looking out there going, oh, I can do lookalike modeling with Gen AI. You don't need Gen AI for lookalike modeling. That's a predictive modeling. That's business rules and machine learning and predictive analytics and predictive modeling. So you don't need Gen AI for that. And so I would just also say, as we're thinking about alignment, as you're thinking about all of the things that you kind of enumerated, also thinking about what are the right use cases. Don't go chasing Gen AI where Gen AI doesn't fit.
Yeah, that was really great. I enjoyed you answering all of mine, but let's tackle some audience questions now. We've had some really good ones so far, so please keep them coming. First off, we talked about so many things that generative AI is good at, and Fatemeh, maybe I can throw this to you. Somebody's asking, what are some things you see generative AI being ill-suited for? I know you talked about where it's not needed, but what are some things that, as of right now, it's not necessarily ready for prime time, in your opinion?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the primetime stuff is the stuff where we don't know if there's safety yet. I think there's a lot of things, we have an acceptable use policy at Salesforce, and for example, facial recognition is something that we do not do. And it's because we have tested dozens and dozens of models, and we know that they're really inaccurate and biased. And so when I think about image generation, text to image, you can make some really beautiful things, but do you want to be using text to image in marketing generation just yet? Are you going to end up, it's this example of like, you ask these models to like, give me a doctor treating a small child, and you get a very homogenous output, right? You don't get a lot of diversity in those outputs. And so I think that's a safety thing. I think that's a bias and safety issue. I think areas where there's a high risk for hallucination and misinformation to be generated, like, let's not do that. Let's kind of bring some of those horses back into the stable until we really know that we can do those things safely. But yeah, I think that Salesforce, one of our main values is sustainability, and so we're actually really thinking about the right sizing of generative AI. These models are incredibly environmentally costly. How do we make sure that we're building, whether it's a large language model or an image model, how do we make sure that we're building it in a way that limits the amount of environmental costliness, reduces the carbon footprint of those models? So I would say those are some of the things where, like, prime time, not quite yet ready yet. Yeah.
Those are a good one. Jeremy, I'd like to add like a marketer's lens. When I talk to them, it's like, my question is, you're saving 5 hours, right? Like from generative AI a week, like what does it help you do? And the general answer that I get is like, it helps us focus on more strategic things. Like a marketer does a whole lot more than just creating emails, right? Creating those subject lines and email body copy. So a lot of strategic planning. Like, yes, generative AI can help, but like you need a marketer, you need human to do those like strategic creative planning. Think about like brand vision and identity. Think about like high level of creative campaigns. On the other side, anything that involves more like understanding nuances, right? Like there could be a crisis communication. You as a marketing team are working towards that. you are trying to understand, like trying to get deeper customer insights, right? Like, so there are a lot of other strategic and creative elements that comes in a marketer's role. And what generative AI is doing is like helping them free up time so they can focus more on this and take away some of that repetitive task, or take away some of, like, time that would take to like start a campaign, start an email. But you still need marketer, because a lot of this is more complex. It requires creative thinking. It requires more planning. It requires more interpersonal, like coordination, or like, you're working with different departments, and that's where marketers are spending the time that they're saving with generative AI.
Yeah, and I would add that providing that real empathy, right? That human touch. It can emulate or simulate what a human would say, but it's not going to resolve those complex customer issues in the same way a human will. And I would also add to that that it's not ready to create original, high quality content, content that has that emotion, that has timely ideas, topical and new perspectives. That content needs to be written by experienced human writers. And you think of Google's EEAT, they added that extra E. That's you need that experience, and then you need the expertise, and you need the authoritativeness, and you need, of course, the trustworthiness. So I think that's where humans really kind of outweigh what Gen AI can do.
You're right. I got to say, I think that we actually have a question tied to this, where there's a lot of concern about the disruption and the skills that the next generation's going to need to have, or even people who their current roles are being disrupted and then they have to upskill in some way. So what should the next generation of marketers do about all the changes in technology? And what advice would you give to either somebody starting out or somebody who needs to upskill in order to, embrace the fact that their old role might not look like their future role?
I think touched on this earlier, training is essential. And also having, you might be adding roles for prompt engineer or more data analyst. But I think that training of your core marketing team in particular is essential. And I think, learning how to integrate Gen AI into your strategy, not just eventually it's not just going to be one-offs. It's going to be, how do I incorporate this technology to better our entire marketing strategy? So I think, yeah, and I'll leave it at that. Yeah, but I think the training is super important, in my opinion. So marketers have to be aware of what they're getting themselves into, aware of the technology, choosing the right tools that matches what they need for their business and their industry, making sure it aligns with their business goals. I think that's also really important.
Actually, it's interesting because I think that we've had this shift from like general marketers to very specialized marketers over the last 15 or 20 years, right? And so you've got your SEO folks, and you've got your PPC folks, and you've got your email marketing team. And I think that we're going to see a little bit more generalization as a result of some of these technologies, because I think that we're going to need more sort of holistic marketing practitioners. So I think that's actually one thing I would say to the next generation is, hey, get back to some of those marketing first principles and understand what those are, understand brand voice. I also think that we're going to need a lot of folks who really double down on data, because these systems depend, and the quality of the output of these systems depend on quality input data, quality data to train against. And so I really think we'll need a lot of folks who go into the areas of data governance practice and data classification practices and really understands that sort of foundational stuff. Yeah.
I think, Fatemeh, just to extend to what you said, you're absolutely right. Like, we're going to need more generalists who understand the entire marketing process, so they know when to leverage AI and when to make sure that they, as a marketer, as a human, have more insights, right? So strategic planning that we talked about, like a lot of these high level creative, like brand vision, that's not something you're going to outsource. Understanding that. But one element is also like having a pulse of your customer. Like that's something that you need to know, because that's what's going to help you leverage, like what do you want to input in the model, what do you want to get, right? So just understanding your business, I think understanding the entire marketing process, but also understanding your customers and the ever-changing trends, right? Like we are in the space where there's rapid transformation in terms of customer behavior, broad overall trends. So how do you interpret those complex market trends, and how can you tweak and tailor your strategy, but then leverage AI as part of your strategy to drive more efficiency, to outsource some of those tasks, but you're still owning the marketing strategic process end to end.
And I'll make a quick plug too, just since we've got a lovely captive audience here. I'm going to make a plug for business ethics and data ethics. We actually have tons of like free content and free training materials in our Trailhead platform around ethical marketing. And the reason we have that is because we can build our technology and our software to enable the most ethical use of marketing and personalization, right? It still takes a human being to use that solution. It takes a human being to build those campaigns, build those segments. So learn what it means to do ethical marketing, learn what it means to do responsible AI, because that's actually going to be a huge part of using these tools and systems and models in a way that delights your customers and doesn't creep them out.
I know we've covered so much ground today, but we've got time for one more. So maybe we'll make this a nice little lightning round, very high level for each of you. How do you think AI will change the marketing discipline in the next year?
Well, I would say I think we've definitely touched on this kind of throughout the entire talk, is that it's incorporated, it's there, the genie's out of the bottle, as Fatemeh said. There's no going back in a way. I mean, clearly there may be pause on how much it's used or how it's used or which investments to make, but it's going to be incorporated in strategies going forward. It's not going to just not be there, I think. And it's not even a fear of missing out. It's to our advantage as marketers to use Gen AI strategically and wisely.
Yeah, and if you're thinking about next year, Jeremy, like the big thing is enhanced personalization. How can marketers leverage AI to continue creating that highly personalized content that helps, like, just not like deliver great experience, but improve like customer engagement and loyalty, right? That's the holy grail. It's not just about your new customers that you're trying to bring to the funnel, but also your existing customers. I think content generation, we are going to see adoption in that. And it started with like subject line and email, but I could see that going into lots of different forms of content, but also other types of content, like not just written, image content generation, visual, audio, right? So it will expand from the type of content as well. But those are the two big trends. And the third thing is like data, as Fatemeh mentioned, like data is the holy grail. Like a lot of marketers need to be more analytical and understand the data, but AI will empower us with advanced data analytics.
Yeah, no, I would say two big things. I think the first one is we've been talking about getting our data houses in order for 10 years. I think what will happen is that because of generative AI, we'll see much more focus on data governance and data classification in the marketing ecosystem. And so I think from a MarTech perspective and sort of a data platform perspective, we'll see a lot more sort of unified IDs and that kind of thing actually being done really, really well, because people want to take advantage of some of these systems. So I think that's number one. And I think number two, I don't want to end on a low note, but I do think we're going to see our first marketing snafu, our first marketing headline of a Gen AI misstep. And I think we will learn a lot from it. I think we'll see sort of the risks of trying to kind of go this alone and try to do this alone, or not having really good partners in place to help support the responsible and ethical and trusted use of generative AI in marketing.
So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I want to stay on with our guests afterwards for like another 5 hours and discuss this. Thanks again to Kelsey, Neha, and Fatemeh for joining us. And a very special thanks to the team at Salesforce. Studio II, our eMarketer production crew behind the scenes, deserves a huge thank you for making this webinar possible. Basically the best team ever. Can't even say enough great things about them. And as promised, we will be emailing you a link to the full recording of today's discussion, so keep an eye out on your inbox for that. And before we wrap up, let me take a moment to tell you about our upcoming events. Mark your calendar for Friday, November 3rd for Attention. Our half-day live summit is focused on trends and predictions for 2024. Registration is open on our events page. And while you're on that page, you can also register for upcoming live Analyst and Tech Talk webinars at eMarketer.com/webinars. Thank you for joining us and enjoy the rest of your workday.